please go ahead and begin whenever you're ready. Susan.
Hi, everyone. Nice to have you here. So we're going to start. Connecting to Collections is a program that developed from Connecting to Collections Care, developed out of Connecting to Collections. And we still do basically the same things they did, but our concentration is on caring for collections. So there are lots and lots of resources and many things that you can do with our website, so be sure to check it out. We have resources that you can look at. We have a discussion forum that you need to register for, and there are over 120 webinar recordings that you can access at the website. And you can keep up with what we're doing on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. And if you don't get the C2CC announce postings, go to this website and you can sign up, or you can send me a message. This is my email, and I'll sign you up. I'd be happy to do that. And coming up next month, we're going to do something on caring for maps and architectural drawings. And then in April and May, we're doing a series on legal issues in collections management with ARCs. And so keep looking at the website. Those advertisements should be posted soon. And now I'm going to turn this over to our speaker for today, Camille Breeze, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. So remember, if you have questions, I'm going to be watching for them. I'll grab them, and so that they don't get lost, put them in the questions comments box, and then we'll answer questions at the end. So thanks, and Camille, take it away.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this Connecting to Collections Care webinar, Practical Solutions for Quilt Care and Display. As Susan mentioned, my name is Camille Myers-Breeze, and I'm the Director and Chief Conservator of Museum Textile Services. We are a textile conservation studio in Andover, Massachusetts. My staff and I work with individuals, cultural heritage institutions, and government agencies, which probably catches most of you. And I also teach widely, including summer classes at the International Preservation Studies Center, previously known as the Campbell Center. I'll also be presenting a webinar on caring for textiles during Preservation Week through the American Library Association, which I see some of you are in the library field. One sec. Okay. Throughout my presentation, I'll be showing you screenshots from my website, www.museumtextiles.com. Most of what you'll see are free MTS handouts from the website. I want you to feel free to go to the resources section of the website and take all of the handouts that you want, reproduce them, do anything that you want with them. They're all divided into categories here, so they're pretty easy to find. You may also enjoy reading the MTS blog. We happen to have one on Quilts up right now. And also on our educational opportunities in the outreach section, you'll see different places that we will be presenting or teaching. If you want to get in touch with me about any textile conservation topic, you can do it through the website. We have a contact form here, or you can email at info@museumtextiles.com. And I also want to encourage you to follow us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at #MuseumTextiles. So without further delay, here is the big question of the day. What is a quilt? I define a quilt in the simplest way possible as a textile constructed of 2 or more layers of fabric connected by stitching. So I'm sure you can think of much more complicated descriptions of what a quilt is, or more specifically what a quilt is not, but I think this basically breaks it down into its simplest part. A quilt may be very large, like the AIDS quilt, which is a series of quilts, or it may be very small, like this little doll's quilt from the, about 1870 or so. A quilt can be made by hand or by a machine. A quilt can be made of many, many pieces, or just a few, like this quote-unquote whole cloth quilt from Wales. Of course, it's more than one piece, but it's just lengths of base fabric, heavily quilted. Some quilts have a lot of thick batting, and some have none, like this quilt top, which some purists might say isn't really a quilt, it's just a quilt top. And just for the record, I don't recommend that you photograph your quilt tops out on your gravel driveway. A quilt can be assembled by piecing, like this log cabin quilt is, or by applique, also called broderie purse, like this very archetypal Baltimore album quilt, or sometimes by a combination of both techniques, as in this crazy quilt. Quilts are often the chosen medium for artists, like this beautiful piece called Tar Beach by Faith Ringgold. And other times, quilts inadvertently become works of art, like this working clothes quilt by Loretta P. Bennett, who's one of the quilters of Gee's Bend. Some quilts contain intricate networks of stitching. That is arguably where the term quilt comes from. And some employ thread ties to connect their layers. And some quilts aren't connected at all throughout the body, like this little Nantucket quilt that you're going to see again and again throughout our presentation. When you look on the back, you don't see any stitches, no stitches connecting. They're only connected the layers are only connected at the perimeter. Some quilts are quilts in technique only, like this astonishing quilted woman's petticoat from the 18th century. And we often call things quilts that aren't quilts at all, one example being this yo-yo quilt, as they're called, which are little purses of fabric sewn together at the perimeter, but not technically a quilted piece. But fortunately, the techniques we're going to talk about today will be applicable to lots of things other than quilts. Things like coverlets, counterpanes, bedspreads, wall hangings, other things like that. So, however you define a quilt, this webinar should be a fun journey into the world of preservation. So let's start at the very beginning with a review of how all collections-based projects begin, with documentation. Before you alter a textile held in your collection, you need to gather all the information you can from as many sources as you can. And these include any donation records, if it's been cataloged before, photographs, including current photographs and historical photographs, like I found of the woman who owned this little outfit. Genealogy records are often really helpful. We have a big library because we have to search through textile and costume history references to find out things that are published that reference our object. Also, an understanding of technology is very helpful. Roller printed versus block printed fabric in a quilt, for example. And what the documentation can often do is help you pinpoint a date range. Sometimes this confirms the date that was given with the object, but more often than not, we find the information we dig up through documentation will actually disprove the story behind the artifact. You want to record the information that you collect in some kind of form. Perhaps you use a database that's specific to your institution, or perhaps you use Past Perfect. We developed a document that's simply a Word table. You can do this in Google Docs also. We take this basic form and we alter it whenever we can. Sometimes we alter it for a specific job. Maybe it's all World War II uniforms we're looking at. And in this case, this is one specifically made of quilts, made for documenting quilts. Again, it's very easy to do this. This particular condition report, both the blank one and the filled out one, are available in the resources section of my website, which I'll show you in a minute. And the thing that I like most before starting a documentation project is to establish your lexicon of terms. Whether it's just you doing this work or you have a group of people, you want to start out by defining the terms you're all going to use. This list is very much a conservation term list. It distinguishes between a crease and a wrinkle, or a stain and discoloration. But you might want to make a sample condition term list about different technical things that apply to what you're documenting. We find then that the occasions where you're looking for something like a quilt in your past perfect, for example, and you come up with bedspreads because somebody's called it a quilt, you can streamline that and reduce the number of errors if you establish your lexicon ahead of time. Once documentation is underway, you can better define the scope of treatment by asking this question: what are your goals for your quilt? Is it just going into a study collection where maybe people will practice conservation techniques on it, or take it out and maybe copy it? Is it going to be just a research tool? Perhaps it's in poor condition, but it is very historical, so researchers might want to come and see it. Many of us are interested in exhibiting quilts, so is that one of the goals of this project? Or are you looking at this quilt now because somebody has asked to take it out on a loan? All of these situations are very common. And the scope of treatment will, of course, reflect what the immediate goal is. It might need to be cleaned. Maybe it just has come in and you're going to rehouse the quilt. Or maybe it requires some stabilization. And as we said, maybe it just requires some kind of display solution. So depending on the scope of your treatment, you may need to speak to a conservator. And if you're not already familiar with it, this is the homepage of the American Institute for Conservation's website, and there's a Find a Conservator button up in the top left. You can search in your geographic area. You can even get really specific and just look under terms like quilt under textile conservation. So you can cast a broad net or a very specific one, and whether you need some advice or you need to hire a consulting conservator, the people on this list are all extremely professional and will all be happy to speak with you. So I'm going to discuss with you 4 aspects of quilt treatment that I believe that all collections care staff can learn to do safely. And the first of those is surface cleaning. This is a great way to know when, I want you to know when and how to surface clean things like pollutants and other particulate matter using a vacuum. So there's a handout on my website that you see pictured right here. And it goes into the equipment that you can use and the techniques you use to safely vacuum things like quilts. It does not take a $2,000 Nilfisk vacuum or even an expensive HEPA filter attachment. You can achieve the same results with a $300 canister vacuum like a Miele that has an excellent standard onboard filter already, and a simple $10 micro attachment kit, which you see photographed here. What few collections professionals know is that textiles conservators almost never vacuum through a screen. If I took a poll right now and I said, who was taught how to vacuum through a screen, I'm sure a lot of you would raise your hands. But dust, possible insects, even new damage from exhibition that are detected through vacuuming are often obscured when you are vacuuming through a screen. So you will be able to read through this handout, download it, and find all sorts of nifty techniques like that. So you always want to vacuum on a clean surface large enough to accommodate your textile. Sometimes that surface is the floor and you have to put plastic down. You often will need to ask for help. Quilts are very big things. One of the hardest parts about vacuuming a quilt is keeping track where you have and haven't vacuumed, because you're not just vacuuming off dirt that you can see. A lot of what you're vacuuming off are very small particles and you can't tell the difference between the clean and the dirty areas. But this simple act of surface cleaning can save you from, for example, spreading a moth or carpet beetle problem from the public galleries where something has been on display, it's near windows and doors, into your storage area. You want to vacuum with the largest attachment that is suitable for the textile in its condition. Here you see us vacuuming a very stable tapestry, and we're using a large flat attachment. If you're doing something more delicate, as you'll see in our video in a moment, you use a smaller attachment. The handout will help walk you through how to make that decision. Okay, so What I'd like to do now is, before we go to the, sorry, Mike, yeah, okay. The other half of this photograph on the slide shows surface cleaning with a vulcanized rubber sponge. And I want to mention that there are more techniques other than vacuuming for surface cleaning, such as vulcanized rubber sponges, chamois, or even just some cotton flannel. And you can do damage to the surface of a textile, I think, more easily than with a vacuum if you don't know what you're doing. So before you undertake additional types of surface cleaning, I think you should speak to a conservator or another specialist who has experience doing that, because they are handy techniques, but they require a little bit of training. Okay, Mike, can we please have our first video? So here I am vacuuming a very nice silk quilt. It's in good condition, there are no losses, but it is silk and it's old. So I've got my Miele canister vacuum on which I've put a micro attachment kit. I'm using the oval bristle brush. I'm picking up and putting down, picking up and putting down. And that way, eventually, you'll get your quilt all cleaned. And here I am on the back of the same quilt, and I've got a larger attachment. I've adjusted my suction, and this is the most delicate tool I need. It'll take me way too much time to do it with a tiny tool. And you can see I'm using my hand here to know where I've vacuumed, but otherwise I can use a pin or a piece of twill tape or something. But keeping track of where you've been is sometimes the biggest challenge. So another thing you see in that picture is that we're not wearing gloves. I doubt there are many textile conservators who wear cotton gloves, except maybe when the curator comes around. If we are working with something dirty, we're more likely to wear a nitrile or a latex glove. But I'm a big fan of super clean hands, washed throughout the day. And this way, if you have something dirty on your object, you're going to see it on your hands. And it's going to allow you to judge very carefully with using your fingertips, which are such important tools. Okay, but before we completely leave the subject of cleaning, I just want to bring up that here is the resources page, and Textile Conservation Basics, that's what it's called. And it has the sample condition report, the blank condition report, it has the conditioning terms, and it also has the vacuuming handout. Some of you might be thinking right now, well, what about wet cleaning quilts? And I'm here to say, unless you've received training and you have experience in wet cleaning quilts, please don't undertake it. Never wash a quilt without some kind of guidance, because fugitive dyes, fragile fabrics, and unpredictable behavior of large, multi-layered quilts like textiles like quilts, they can be harmed during the wet cleaning process, even when precautions are taken. So please bear that in mind next time you consider throwing your white quilt in the bathtub with OxyClean or something like that. Okay. Stabilization or repair can also be undertaken by collection staff as long as a few core principles are followed. All stabilization must be reversible, that your stitches and any fabrics you use must do no harm to the textile upon application or upon removal. I also want to mention here that restoration or reversing changes over time to bring a textile back to a perceived idea of what it used to look like or used to be like. This is very, very rarely done by museum conservators. Instead, we stabilize an item to enable it to fulfill its goal as a study or a display object. So an excellent method of stabilizing textiles is using an overlay. And an overlay is defined as a shear material placed on the object's surface with the goal of changing the appearance and or protecting the object. Here you see me with a tallit, a prayer shawl that I'm encapsulating in net. There are three materials often used for overlays on textile conservation, and I'll refer you to the AIC wiki and you can read all about them. But the three categories are silk, including sheer silk crepeline, net, which comes in nylon, silk, and cotton, or polyester shears, including Stabilitex, which is now called Tetex, and other polyester shears. But for the purposes of the webinar today, I'm just going to concentrate on nylon net. And these are the reasons that nylon net is my favorite overlay material. It has very good transparency and also drape. It doesn't unravel. You can cut, after you've sewn an area, you can cut your edges tight and they will never unravel. Materials like silk crepeline, you have to do a rolled edge, and polyester Stabilitex, you sometimes hot cut it. Enormous time is put into just finishing the edges, but that's not the case with nylon net. It's also commercially available in literally an endless array of colors, although I would say 75% of the netting we do is with this antique gold color that you see there. It's amazing. It blends with everything. And if you need to, you can easily dye nylon net yourself. It doesn't require expensive equipment. Nylon net is also available in wide widths, so if we have to net the entire top or bottom of a quilt, we can do it in one solid piece, which saves time. And also net is like $2 a yard. It's pretty unbeatable. It's a great material. The things that people don't like about nylon net are that it does have some sheen. It stretches more in one direction than in the other, so you should be conscious if you're netting something that's going to bear weight. For example, you want to try to put it with the stretchy direction going sidewise, not up and down. People are concerned that silk can be abrasive. Net can be abrasive, which is true if you're handling your object in a negative way. It's also susceptible to light damage. It will fail if it's put in a window, but you should not be putting your textiles in a susceptible place anyway. So I think that argument kind of goes the way of the wind. So by color matching a washed and ironed piece of high quality, not sparkly kind of net, you can protect a vulnerable area on a quilt like this so that it's sound enough to endure handling and exhibition. You can't even probably tell, but the picture on the left has no net and the picture on the right has like a pink colored net. Imagine if you were to take a piece of color matching solid cotton and get in through the interstices on this piece and actually do an underlay. You were skilled enough to do that, and then you put an overlay between the color compensating underlay and the sheer overlay. You can make this block look like there's almost no damage. So if that is within the goal of your treatment scope, net is a great way to do that. Mike, could we please see the first of our netting videos? So this shows you just how to put net on a vulnerable block on a quilt. Here's our little Nantucket quilt. So we've actually got a little underlay already there under a hole, and now Morgan is pinning out a piece of antique gold net, and she's not pulling it too tight, she's just smoothing it and letting it lay flat. She's pinning it on all four directions so that it's not going to shift. The next thing she's doing is she's sewing in the ditch around the perimeter of that weak block. She's using a curved needle. This one happens to be from Colonial Needles, a curved beading needle. And we always work with cotton thread, except occasionally we'll use a thin polyester, but the general rule is cotton. We have decided on this quilt, since it has no stitching on the back, all our stitching must float in the middle. None of our stitching goes to the back of the quilt. That makes it very hard. Morgan's left a tail there. Once she goes around the perimeter of that diamond, she's going to be able to come right back, tie to her tail, and then bury her tails, needle them up, and pull them through the middle layers. So it went by really quickly, but let me just reinforce that sometimes you would sew around the perimeter of a block, like this pink diamond-shaped block, going all the way through to the back of the quilt, and other times you won't. Crazy quilts, you can almost always see that the perimeter of all the blocks on a crazy quilt are mirrored in the perimeter stitching on the back. In that case, it's pretty easy for a conservator to sew all the way through, capture all the layers of the quilt, and have that stitch not stand out, not be ugly for people that are looking at the back, not be confusing to people on the back. They would know that that's a repair stitch. Other times, we choose not to go all the way through to the back. It's really on a case-by-case basis. So if Mike is going to cue up the other netting video, and we're going to show you the slight differences when you're netting an edge. Binding is so often a weak area on a quilt. So we take the same nylon net, and in this case we have a long skinny piece. We've cut off a bolt of brown net, and Morgan has it, she's pinning it around. Not too tight, again, just tight enough so that it's not bagging, it doesn't stick out. She's pinning in the ditch there. Again, that ditch is created where the line of stitching around the binding is held onto the quilt. And after she stitches it in place, she's going to start at one end or start at the middle, and she's going to sew it. If more than one person is working, you want to start in the middle and work out, because sometimes your net will either get tight as you go and you'll have to loosen it, or it might actually, you might end up with a surplus in the middle. So here's Morgan. She's sewing with a straight needle this time. And we're using a running back stitch. We're taking a forward stitch of about a 1/2 inch float on the back. There she is making her 1/2 inch float coming up in the ditch. And then she's making a small 1/16 of an inch back stitch. So we call that a running back stitch. Some people will call that a back stitch. How do you know how big your stitches should be? My goal is to use the biggest stitch possible to achieve your goal. In this case, the goal is to keep the net around the vulnerable area and prevent fragments from falling out. So in my rule of thumb is if you can stick your pinky in between your stitches, that's probably a little bit too big. So you want it to be too small for your pinky to get under. If you're using more stitches, like quilters, the goal is to make as many stitches as possible. Quilt conservation, the goal is to use as few stitches as possible in any intervention treatment. So you want to avoid that natural quilting tendency to make lots and lots of tiny stitches. Make big floats on the back, small things on the front. I mentioned very quickly that we use cotton in almost all of our stitching, either a Gutermann or a Mentler cotton. We'll always use one strand. We don't use two. If you need to use two for some application, you would use a thicker thread like a button and craft. Okay. So we're going to move on now to the next slide. I see lots of questions coming through. That's great. We'll talk about it in the questions period. We have a very detailed handout on conservation netting on the website that you will all enjoy reading through. It has step-by-step instructions on how to do what we just taught you. So I hope that you will download that and have a good look at it and then practice some netting. The techniques work both on quilts and other things. There is also a sheer overlay resource. There's a sheet on sheer overlay supplies, and I haven't pictured it here. But in the resources section of my website, there's one category that's called IPSC resources, IPSC resources, and under that there's a page for sheer overlays. That's where all the handouts for my classes at the Campbell Center, the International Preservation Study Center, that's where all of their handouts are. And the sheer overlay supply list, where I get the materials, is hidden down in there. I'm sorry that I didn't put it in my presentation. The next subject that we're going to talk about is exhibition. Most of you will have experience putting displays together, though you may have been discouraged by the challenges of exhibiting large textiles like quilts. Quilts and other textiles are most often displayed in one of these manners. Flat, like inside of a case deck. You could do that maybe with that tiny quilt, but not with most quilts. On a board or a slant board is also a very popular way to exhibit things. If the quilt is small enough, it might go in a frame or in a shadow box. But the majority of quilts we put on display are displayed from a pole if they have a sleeve, or a Velcro or magnetic slat. We'll talk a little bit more about. In addition, you need to think about the method of attachment, as I call it, or the way that the textile is going to be attached within that display. If you're displaying something in a case deck, like the shoes and the baby onesie in this display case, it's passive. They're just sitting on the case deck. Maybe there's mylar underneath them in a perfect world, and maybe there isn't. We also have pins. Sometimes big fabric-covered boards or slant boards are employed for quilts. In that case, you can simply pin them in around the top edge and a few other key areas, and then 6 weeks later take them off. That's how many of our state customers, for example, do it. More often we are using stitching as a method of attachment. We have to stitch a sleeve onto the top back edge of a quilt, or we are stitching a Velcro header to the back of the quilt. Sometimes, like a small quilt might go into a frame and we might just hold it with pressure, which is kind of like a passive method. No stitching is necessary. And more often than not now, we are foregoing Velcro hanging systems, which we've been advocating for the last 25 years or so, in favor of a magnetic slat system. And it uses an old-fashioned sleeve, just like a pole, and then a magnetic slat that we get from Small Corp. If people are interested in more information about Small Corp, they can get that from me. So a lot of these handouts that I've just been showing you are in the resources part of my webpage under the Displaying Flat Textiles section. There are tons more than what I've showed you on here. Like, for example, these two. Making and installing a Velcro header. Point-by-point directions on how to attach Velcro to a fabric like twill tape or cotton, to place it on the back of your textile along the true horizontal, which is rarely the same thing as the top edge. I think we all know top edges of quilts are often not straight. So this handout will tell you how to put your Velcro across the invisible magic horizontal axis at the top edge. And then also how to get around the challenges of actually maneuvering a large object like a quilt, how to get it on the wall safely, things like that. So we have one last little video for you, if Mike could cue it up. And what this video is showing you is I'm sewing a sleeve on the back of a quilt. It's a fairly straightforward procedure. What I'm using is 3-inch wide twill tape, cotton twill tape. I've lined the top of the twill tape up with the ditch of that little quilt you saw a minute ago, the little Nantucket quilt. And I'm sewing through that ditch, and it's coming about an 1/8 inch down from the top of the quilt. And then about 2.5 inches down from there is the first line of blocks, the first natural ditch on the front. And the second row of stitching, I'm going to sew through that ditch. So even though I've got a 3-inch twill tape, the channel that the magnetic slat system is going to go through on this is just going to use the top 2.5 inches. You can use twill tape, you can use a tube of fabric, anything like that. But the stitches that I'm using are just like what I was pointing out before. The fewest stitches possible. In this case, we've got about a 1/2 inch float on the back, come up to the front and take a small 1/8 or 1/16 inch back stitch on the ditch. That's just the way I like it. Some people might be wondering why use a back stitch instead of just a running stitch. If you do a long, extensive running stitch and something should catch one of your stitches, they will just gather your object up like a drawstring. So the benefit of a back stitch is that that phenomenon won't happen. If you catch a fingernail or something on your 1/2 inch float on the back, it's only going to pull that last little stitch. That's one of the reasons that we really like back stitches. Okay. The final aspect of quilt care that I'm going to present is rehousing or storage. There are 3 types of storage that are frequently used for quilts, specifically for quilts. One of those is flat storage. A small quilt, I guess, conceivably could go on a shelf in a cabinet or something like that. If you're thinking right now that stacking 10 quilts on a bed constitutes flat storage, I would say that it doesn't. I believe that display is never a storage solution, whether it's leaving a dress on a mannequin for 20 years or leaving a bunch of quilts on a bed. That's not a storage solution in my box. All textiles have to come off display and rest in a dark, stable environment free from gravity, ventilation, and the risks of visitors and all those things. Maybe an exception to that rule would be upholstered furniture, some floor coverings, perhaps a fancy set of bed hangings, but these are generally only displayed in a controlled environment with regular housekeeping and professional care. The other methods of storage are box storage and rolled storage. So what determines whether a textile is boxed, rolled, hung, or stored in, say, a flat file like this? Well, I would argue that the size of the object is the first thing that dictates that. If you have a flat storage unit like this and a bunch of small art quilts that are, say, 2x3, this would be an excellent storage solution for them. Otherwise, we generally have to think between boxed or rolled. I find that institutional policy often drives whether a collection of quilts is rolled or it is put in boxes. The person who made the decision when the funds were available and the work was done is the one who decides whether it's rolled or boxed. And some of us will have, sort of opinions on one way or another. I personally don't love rolling quilts for reasons I'll show you in a little while, but other people are big fans and they think that folding quilts in boxes is problematic, and I respect that too. Your resources, what money you have available. If you're starting a quilt storage solution from scratch, it has a big role to play. But often overlooked, the condition of your artifacts will play a role in whether they can be folded in a small box, in a large box, put in a box with a couple other quilts, put in their own box, things like this. So in discussing rehousing materials, I want to begin with the layer that touches the object, which I call the wrapping. So the basic wrapping we're all familiar with is is acid-free tissue. It comes in buffered and unbuffered. I'm going to get right up on my soapbox and tell you I don't believe you should own any buffered tissue for textile conservation. None. Technically, the reason it exists, it's buffered with a calcium carbonate. It makes it slightly basic. The argument, and it's used in paper this way, is that if you put it with let's say a cotton quilt that is aging and acidifying, that it's going to slow down that process. But I find that it's very easy to confuse the buffered from the unbuffered tissue, and many times I've received a quilt packed at a really good museum, like a 100% silk crazy quilt packed in buffered tissue paper. You want to avoid using a basic material like buffered tissue with a naturally acidic thing like a silk or wool quilt. We're getting a little into textile science, which is not part of this talk, but I would like to encourage you to never buy buffered tissue again. Stick to the acid-free unbuffered tissue. Here you see ours. It comes on a roll. A key to easy dispensing of your tissue is if you have it here like between a flat surface and a vertical surface, you can just grab the edge, pull it towards you, and just rip it. Just practice it. Just rip it right off the roll. It gives you a beautiful torn edge. I think that too many minutes of my life have been wasted cutting tissue off a roll. I encourage you to learn how to do this. And then we either take that tissue and, say, line a box with it, or scrumple it up like this and make a snake. Another common and excellent wrapping material will be cotton fabric. It could be cotton sheeting you have. It could be unbleached cotton muslin. It could be bleached cotton muslin. Either way, you want to wash it once, maybe twice. Try no detergent. Try a free and clear detergent, no fabric softener, things like that. Run it through, get it all washed and dried, and take it out promptly, and you won't have to iron it. And you'll get lots of mileage out of this cotton fabric as a wrapping material or a protection. Sometimes, especially for rolling quilts, you might want to use some polyester batting because it makes the angle that the quilt is rolling at, that curve, it makes it a little less severe and can soften something. But polyester batting likes to shed little bits of fiber all over your object. So you want to sort of put down a layer of tissue, then a piece of polyester batting, and then another piece of tissue. Make a little sandwich with it. After you've packed or rolled something, you might need to cover that roll. And the materials we like to use are, Tyvek is a really good material, but polyethylene sheeting is also, it's inexpensive. You can get it at the hardware store. If you need to protect it, for example, because you're transporting it. I don't recommend that you use one of these non-breathable or like low air transfer materials if for storage, unless you have a really high-risk storage area. You can just have the final layer be cotton fabric or tissue, something like that. And don't worry, there's a really beautiful handout that goes over this. I can't do it justice here. So box storage is my favorite way to store quilts, but there's box storage and box storage. So here's a beautiful handmade box, and we've got these two quilts sitting in it because we're going to come back shortly. We're going to treat it, and then we're going to pack them properly in this quilt. This is a good illustration of not using a box really nicely. Many of the archival boxes that we use are made of acid-free cardboard. It can be blue, it could be tan, it could be corrugated, it could be not corrugated. They're all pretty much the same. And they have the same inherent vice, which is that over time they will absorb acids and dirt and things from the environment as well as from your artifact. So for the last 25 years or so, a lot of textile conservators have been proponents of polypropylene boxes. These come in a sort of a white, an opaque white or a milky, clearish color. They're 100% inert. They're pH neutral and they don't off-gas over time. They stay pH neutral forever, unlike acid-free cardboard, which acidifies. There are some other pros and cons, which you'll see in the handout I'll show you, but I'm a big fan of polypropylene boxes, especially for institutions that might not have the best collection storage conditions. You can stack more of them on top of each other. You can clean them off easily. They're good. If you are moving things in and out of the box a lot, you'll notice a static charge can build up. You want to be very careful of that. But otherwise, I'm pretty much a proponent. What do you do if you've had your quilt stored in 20 old blue boxes and now somebody's giving you a donation? You've bought 20 brand new polypropylene boxes and you want to still use all of them. Maybe your boxes were too full and now you're going to put half as many quilts in the boxes. Well, a key to using old boxes and new boxes in a good way is that you can use your old boxes to store your wool and your silk quilts. They are naturally more acidic, and so they will be more at home in an older cardboard box. And then reserve your brand new polypropylene boxes or even your brand new archival board boxes for your more vulnerable pieces like your cotton quilts, because they want to be in a pH neutral environment a little bit more than your silk and wool. This goes for costume, goes for everything else. I like to store things by materials, and I like to reserve my older boxes for wool and silk. Again, you're going to need your acid-free unbuffered tissue. I like to put it inside the box to put one quilt down, and say you have a second quilt on top, put another layer of tissue and put the second quilt. Your tissue acts as sort of a sling to help you carry. And in the case of polypropylene boxes, it's good to have an organic layer like fabric or tissue in there in case, say, your air conditioning breaks after a hurricane, it's 100 degrees. The temperature inside your box, that's 72 or whatever your AC was set at, will heat up much more slowly than the air outside the box. And this dynamic can sometimes encourage condensation to occur. And a very simple way to mitigate that risk is to make sure that you have a lining of muslin or tissue in your box, and which I think you would do anyway. Okay. So then there's rolled storage, and most of us are familiar with acid-free tubes. We can buy them from catalogs, but we might not have the resources available for an acid-free tube. So the way you could take a standard tube from a shipping company or something you find, or tubes that you are given from an architectural firm, is to put a barrier on them. For example, you can put polyethylene sheeting, you can put Marvel Seal Mylar, all these materials, which are in a handout that I'm going to show you. You can put those around your tubes, stick them in the ends a little bit, and you can render a free or inexpensive tube suitable for rolled storage. And you're going to want to use your acid-free unbuffered tissue. You don't necessarily need to interleave your whole textile, but we've chosen to do so here on this little silk Nantucket quilt. You may have remembered the very first pair of pictures I showed you. It showed the tumbling blocks on the left, and the back it showed the picture of the back of the quilt. And you may have noticed it was really wrinkly, because not only does this quilt have very tall batting, but it's been stored rolled, and so the back is just coated with wrinkles. So when we rolled it to rehouse it, we made sure to place the quilt face down on tissue on the table, and then we rolled it up like that. That way, the fabric on the back of the quilt is taking the shorter turn around the track, like the inner lane on the racetrack, and the body of the front of the quilt is taking the gentler, the wider track around the racetrack. So that way, any damage from wrinkling from being rolled is more likely to occur to the back than the front. You can tell I don't really like saying, oh, this was the solution. For example, this quilt had to be transported in a car, and it was brought on the tube and went back on the tube. When you're done rolling up your tube, you're going to want to put something like tissue or cotton, or if you're traveling with it, Tyvek, polyethylene sheeting, all of these same lovely materials that I've mentioned. So here's a set of pictures to walk you through how you would prepare a quilt to get stored in a box. It's all common sense and works really well in pairs. So choose a nice clean environment with ample space. Even though this is 2 tables pushed back to back, they're still smaller than the quilt, but with 2 of us, it's adequate. If this quilt was super fragile, we would probably need to do it on the floor. So here we are, we've chosen to fold it with the quilted side in and the lining out. And then how many times you fold your quilt in one direction and then in the next direction is really decided by the size of your container. Remember that picture of the 2 quilts in the box, where they're sort of swimming in this big box? Well, here we're taking this one small box and we're using it to judge, okay, if we fold the quilt in quarters this way and then quarters in the other, it's going to fit. But you keep the box on hand to help teach you how to do that. So we've folded the quilt in quarters and we've used long snakes in the folds. And then we have short snakes of tissue here, using the box as a guide, and we're just folding the quilt up on itself. One after another, and it happened to work out mathematically really nicely into this box. And here you see the final box. It's a white polypropylene box that's lined with unbuffered acid-free tissue. The quilt goes in and then the tissue gets folded, closed, and of course we have to label this box because all our boxes will look alike if we don't label it. Okay. So I've just given you a lot of information. I'll tell you again where to find it. So this is a quilt storage guidelines handout that you can download. And here's choosing the best storage materials. This is a chock full of information, including some links to suppliers. We all have our favorite suppliers. No one supplier is better than another. But you're going to be able to follow step by step the recommendations that you've heard me make today. Most of my recommendations are made with cost effectiveness as one of the driving principles. It's the way my company works and certainly the way all of my clients need to work. So you'll notice a lot of creative ways to pinch pennies while you're doing this. And all of those handouts are here in textile storage in the resources section of the MTS website. Okay, so this concludes my presentation on practical solutions for quilt care and display. Some of what I've told you may sound new, or maybe some of the techniques I've mentioned are things you've been secretly doing all along that kind of go against what you might have been taught or what the books have told you. But I think that by using common sense and taking advantage of resources available, all collections care specialists can learn to master these few simple techniques. I'd like to thank Susan Barger, Mike Morneau, and the FAIC, which has made a huge difference in my career, for presenting this webinar today, and now I will happily take your questions.
Okay, so I'll read the questions, and if you have other questions, feel free to put them in there. There were a couple of questions on what kind of pins do you use, regular sewing pins or?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I happen to be fond of Clover brand pins, and they have silk pins which are blue and yellow, and then they have a slightly longer straight pin that are orange and green. I don't know what they're called. But those are both really good, strong, long-lasting pins. Pins always start out straight and then they curve as you use them. All of them do. It's not that Clover don't. You know, all pins will do that. So then we have certain things, like if you're pinning layers of net to a quilt, a bent pin is the perfect tool. It comes back to you. So eventually we try to distinguish, but this box has bent pins, this box has straight pins. But maybe that's just me. I'm just crazy about materials. I think you all like supplies too.
So, are you using long pins or short old-fashioned straight pins?
Whatever.
Okay.
There's really no advantage to different lengths of pins.
Okay.
It depends. A really thin, very thin textile like that Nantucket quilt I showed you a lot. We've been using the silk pins by Clover, which are maybe a quarter inch shorter than the green and orange pins, which are the next size up.
Okay. The next question is, what kind of netting do you use?
All of the netting I illustrated there was nylon net. We get it through Joann Fabrics or fabric.com. It's absolutely a commercial net. It's distinguished from the others in the store because it doesn't have sparkles on it. It's not big. It doesn't look like it's a tutu. It's bridal tulle is what it is. It's the highest quality bridal tulle. Now, in addition to what you can get at a place like Joann's, you can get a higher quality nylon bridal tulle in that diamond, the diamond pattern it is. It's a heat welded product. You can get that at like bridal supply places. And then in the sheer overlay supply list I mentioned that's on the website, there are some vendors in France and in England of the highest end nylon net. Some conservators only dye their own net, but I use both kinds.
Okay, and do you trim off excess netting after stitching? And if so, how close? Do you use applique scissors for trimming?
Oh, I don't know what applique scissors are. I don't have fancy tools. Let me just use the small pointy scissors for that.
Okay.
I try not to use my thread cutting scissors to trim net because then they won't be sharp enough to cut thread. So like we have a pair of Fiskars that's maybe 3 inches long and that they end in a point, and those are perfect for trimming net. If you try to cut your net to a perfect shape, pin it down and sew it around in the ditch, what you'll find is it'll either shift a little bit or it'll end up being a little smaller after you've sewn it. So that's why I don't cut my shapes until after I've sewn it down. And it takes a little practice trimming net. First of all, of course, you're cutting on an artifact, which you have to take care of when you're doing. But secondly, it's a series of cells, right? So you really you can cut as close as the next cell over from the cell that your thread is in. You can get so close. But generally, after we've trimmed net from a couple blocks, you'll accidentally trim too close. You'll trim the cell that has your thread, and then your net will pop up. So after we've trimmed, we always check real carefully, and sometimes we'll have to thread up again and go and put in a few stitches and just secure a place that we've cut too close. But it's still more time efficient than treating the edge of a crepeline or a sable text overlay patch.
Yeah, so applique scissors have like a big bill on the bottom side, and they're very sharp so that you can put them under what you're trimming without getting the other thing. But it sounds like that's a pretty good method with a small scissors. Is there a good source for cotton thread? The local chain fabric stores has mercerized cotton, polyester wrapped cotton. What kind of thread is recommended? And then let's go to your local quilt supply store.
Metler and Gutermann both make a very nice cotton, 100% cotton mercerized thread. One of them, I think it's Gutermann calls it silk finish, so you have to look really carefully. There'll be a big display, and only like a sixth of it is the cotton ones that I'm talking about. The majority of it is polyester. We don't use any polyester sewing thread in textile conservation, with the exception of either weight-bearing applications or extremely fine applications with a monofilament. So for the majority of our work, we use a cotton thread. I'm sorry, I don't know whether it's a number 40 or a number 50. I think the Gutermann's a 40 and the Metler's a 50, but just your standard cotton sewing thread. We also have a large selection of DMC mercerized cotton embroidery thread. It's called machine embroidery thread. It comes on a spool to distinguish it from the hand embroidery floss, which comes on the little skeins. But that's very hard to buy. We don't use it as often, and certainly never use that in any kind of weight-bearing capacity, like attaching a header. But as long as you use a good sewing thread, that's Metler or Gutermann. Coats makes nice thread too. You're gonna get a sense when you're sewing whether your thread is too aggressive, it's too big, it's too chunky, and you want to maybe go for a thinner thread. Okay.
There's a question about when you were talking about magnetic mounting, and the question is, can pressure cause damage to the textile?
There's so little pressure, but it's occurring inside the sleeve. What the magnetic system that I described to you, it's very complicated, and it's very hard to represent fully in this capacity. But what you're doing is you're sewing a sleeve on the back of your quilt. You're putting a magnetic powder-coated thin aluminum or thin metal strip through that sleeve, and then that is being magnetized to the wall, to a slat on the wall. So there are no magnets on the front of the textile in that application. That's what we use for quilts. There are other times where we use quilt magnets on the front of a textile in an exhibition capacity, but we would only do that if the textile was not going to be harmed by that.
Okay.
It's a fairly new field, the use of magnets in art conservation and especially in textile conservation. But there will be a book coming out soon by Gwen Spicer that will be an excellent resource for people.
Yeah. Is there a standard quilt weight to use for slat and board angle ratio to go by? So some kind of.
No. Everything is on a case by case basis.
Okay. We were shown a slant board, and yeah, but she says she's not always getting the videos. The videos will be in the recording. So if you weren't able to see them, they will be in the recording. And Mike said that it's because of differences in people's internet speed. How do you address light damage to the fabric?
If there is light damage that has caused the fabric to be frayed or to tear or to fade, then it may render the quilt not suitable for exhibition. If you're lucky, you can mitigate the damage done by light exposure through stabilization techniques. For example, putting an overlay over every occurrence of the damage and weakened fabric, or wrapping the whole edge of a quilt that was on the window side of the bedroom for 50 years, or that has a pattern where the woman's legs were every day when she stepped out of bed or sat and put her slippers on. We've seen all of that. So the netting technique that I've showed you is adequate. There's a tiny bit of color compensation to net also, which sometimes you can use to your advantage if you have color change, differential fading on one side versus the other. But the bottom line is that visible results from light exposure, like color change, are just the end of the line. It's the last stage in the long and damaging procedure of light damage. It's fundamentally weakened if you have color change, and may, as I said, render your object a poor candidate for exhibition. Maybe one that you take to a textile conservator.
Okay. Is there a maximum amount of time that a quilt can be on display?
I like to say that even in the best of circumstances, like at the MFA or some big museum, that 6 months is the maximum that we aim to hang a quilt. One of the things I love to do when a couple comes into my studio and they've just bought a quilt and they want me to clean it and prep it to go on display in their wall is I'll say, and now you get to go out and buy another one. So you can rotate them 6 months on, 6 months off. It's really better for something to be off of display for longer than 6 months, especially something that's important enough to be in a museum collection. But within your own house, do as I say, not as I do. Try 6 months on, 6 months off. I try not to leave anything on display in my own home longer than that. But if something is in an exhibit and it's traveling to multiple venues, it's going to come down and rest for a couple of days or a week or something between venues and then come back out. You really need to know that your object is sound enough to withstand that type of handling as well as that long-term exhibition. And often the rules of thumb are broken when somebody wants to borrow our beautiful thing and show it to the masses. we'll let it be exhibited longer than we would otherwise.
Okay. When folding quilts for boxes, does each fold need a tissue barrier?
I like to start off by putting a sausage or snake, whatever you want to call it, down the middle, just to pad the fold. But unless your quilt is in very weak condition and it might either catch on itself if it has little embellishments, or you might lose pieces of it. Unless those conditions are there, you don't need to interleave it with tissue. No, it turns out it makes it very expensive. And then when people bring us things completely interleaved with tissue, we end up with like tons of old dirty tissue. And It's tough. It's I think it's unnecessary in most cases. So we'll put a big sausage down the first long fold, a big sausage down the second long fold, and then maybe when we're folding it in the short direction, maybe the first two folds get sausaged, and then the layers sit on top of the previous sausage. So you don't really need more than that generally, but it's on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. What would you recommend as a cover for wooden dowels, or poles that are used for storage?
Oh, sure. You need an excellent barrier material that's going to isolate the products in the wood. Mylar or Melanex is the traditional one, but I'm a fan of a product called Marvel Seal, Marvelseal, Marvel Seal, which I believe is in my conservation materials handout along with a place where I buy it. But you can find it at many of the archival supply companies. It's aluminum, nylon, and polypropylene blend, I believe. Don't hold me to that. Thank you. And it's got a shiny silver side and then a dull silver side. You can actually iron it to itself, a little hard around a little dowel, but you can also double stick it to itself. They make a Marvel Seal tape. That's a really excellent barrier between the wood and your quilt. But I'm hoping you're not actually rolling the quilt on a wooden dowel, because the diameter is going to be not beneficial to the quilt. Why don't you try cardboard tubes that you've covered with a barrier and then run that dowel through the tube.
Yeah.
Avoid PVC pipe, which a lot of us think is great because you can get it at Home Depot. But you want to avoid that because it off-gases polyvinyl PVC, chlorine. It off-gases chlorine, excuse me. And I think something even yuckier. But it also bows over time. I've used it earlier in my career on a very short-term quilt exhibit because it was cheap and easy. And then since then I've used different methods.
Okay. Do you recommend reverse rolling one face up for a while and then the other?
I don't see why that wouldn't be a good, preventative measure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I never thought of that.
If quilts are boxed, how often do you refold the quilt?
We like to look through our study collection every 2 to 3 years to make sure that there's not some mysterious insect or mold situation going on in them. And I personally don't feel compelled to refold my quilts. I personally am not bothered by a quilt being folded in the same place. I know that over the course of 10, 20, 30 years in a museum, the quilt's probably not going to be in a better condition than it was in a drawer or in a cabinet in somebody's house, which is where we see those fold discoloration lines and fold damage lines. And probably, I don't know, I think it's an unnecessary use of your personnel and supply resource to constantly be refolding your quilts just from a preventative measure.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
How do you figure out how many quilts is too many in an acid-free box?
Oh, what a great question. So the answer is you're going to have the devil on one shoulder going, go on, put 3 in every box and do the math. And you're like, right, I have 99 quilts. That's 33 boxes. Boom. And then the angel is sitting on your other shoulder saying, oh, but I know that I hate pushing them down and some are weaker than others. And the answer is going to be somewhere in the middle based on your resources, your understanding of your collection, and also the capacity to grow. If you get your 33 boxes and you put 3 quilts in each, and then somebody gives you a quilt, well, what do? Where does it go? If you fill all your boxes halfway full, then one way that your collection storage can grow without taking up any more shelving is by putting 1 additional quilt over time in each box. That's the kind of sort of collections management magic, I think, when you do all that, the deciding on it. But try to err with your boxes being emptier rather than fuller.
How do you recommend sewing object numbers on quilts?
I think that any way that they're hand sewn is just fine, and I personally like Tyvek, little pieces of white Tyvek to write on. It's easier to write on than twill tape, and you don't have to spend that time turning each edge of your cut twill tape. You could just sew those buggers on, same place every quilt, back, bottom, corner, whatever, for consistency down the line. If somebody's like, is this the top, is this the bottom? If you know that your accession number is always in the back, bottom, left corner, that's just the kind of consistency that makes my conservator brain happy. But you just try to make a logical institutional decision and try to put it somewhere like in a handbook so that everybody does it the same way.
Can net patching be done on a coverlet too?
It can. It doesn't often blend the same way, but say a blue and white jacquard coverlet, yeah, it's also successful there. You might want to put a solid piece of fabric on the back, like a little pinked square of blue cotton, and then put your net on the front. Because if you're dealing with a part of your coverlet that's sort of unravelly and loose, net, of course, is really loose. It doesn't have a body. So if you put net on the back and net on the front in an unwoven sort of damaged area, it might just not have enough body and not enough oomph. So if you can afford to put something on the back, if there's an actual established back, then try putting a solid piece on the back and net on the front. That'll be a really good sandwich for a coverlet. It's certainly, net is way less visible on a coverlet than Stabilitex or Crepeline.
The next question is, how long can you leave a quilt in a box before refolding?
Forever.
Okay.
I don't believe I personally don't think that you should go into a properly housed box in a professional collection done by a professional. You should be able to just leave it there until, 50 years. I don't believe that you should go in and change it just for the sake of changing it. And not everybody will agree with me, but that's my opinion.
Sleeves are weight bearing. Would you use polyester thread for attaching them instead of cotton thread?
No, we still use the cotton thread. And the exception is when we put a Velcro header on a tapestry. A tapestry is much heavier. Then we use a cotton wrap poly, a button and craft thread. But that is too thick for quilts. Quilts don't have an interstice the way a woven tapestry does. So I would just stick to that. Other people might like polyester. The reason I avoid polyester, especially in a situation where an object is going to hang under its own weight, is that polyester does not respond to environmental changes, whereas your quilt, which is by and large going to be made of natural organic materials, it does respond to environmental fluctuations. So it's going to shrink and grow and move around. And if your thread is not doing the same thing, it basically is like a saw. It's a rigid edge against which your object is getting bigger and smaller. So having an organic thread in an organic object is generally the rule of thumb.
Would nylon netting be useful on clothing?
It's excellent on clothing. The Conservation netting handout will show you all of the applications. It's a fantastic material. It's really good.
Can you use, we have two things on pool noodles. One says, can you use pool noodles to roll a quilt on? And the other one is, can you use pool noodles for covering the dowels before rolling a quilt for storage?
I've never tested pool noodles to find out whether they are just expanded polyethylene, which is what ethafoam is. Say, for the sake of argument, they are 100% expanded polyethylene, which means they're an inert material. They're going to be colored, but in order to get color into polyester, it's done in such an high temperature industrial way that I think that the risk of that color transferring in some kind of an emergency is probably nil. So if all of those things were true, then I prefer the idea of putting something rigid through the middle of it, because a pool noodle is squidgy, so when you're holding it, you're going to be making your finger dents in that polyester. So my gut tells me that I would rather do it over a solid dowel middle. But I don't like rolling quilts.
Yeah, there are more expensive pool noodles that you can buy that have no dye in them that are white. So that might be something people would like to consider.
Thank you.
Let's see. And Paige Myers said, in our museum,
Hi, Paige.
we sew numbers on each quilt corner, so no matter how it's folded, you can find it.
Wow, best case scenario. I love it.
Yeah, okay. And it looks like our final question is from Claire Lobdell in Connecticut. She says, we have a large quilt that's hung in my museum since 1976 when it was sewn for the bicentennial. I know this is terrible. Down, clean it, and give it a rest. And it's been sewn to a wooden dowel frame, a wooden frame that goes around the whole perimeter of the quilt. Once it's fully cleaned and rested, should it be hung from something else rather than that's sewn on the horizontal top?
I'm sorry, but there are too many parameters, too many variables for me to be able to answer that question. But a consulting conservator would love to come and look at it. We could probably teach you how to safely deinstall the quilt yourselves rather than paying us to be there for the deinstallation. But all of those other questions about how to safely put it back on display, there are too many variables for me to answer it verbally.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And then we have a question from Buenos Aires.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, bienvenidos. What are your suggestions about temperature and relative humidity for storage of quilts?
The best conditions for storage of any organic artifacts are the best that you can provide. In a dry environment or an environment like I live in where winter is very, very dry in the air, but in summer the air is very, very wet. We just try to use enough air conditioning so that we take some moisture out in the summer, and then we try to keep the temperature low enough in the winter and not use the heat too much so that the air does not dry out too much. So the first thing to do is to eliminate your extremes. And then a very small number of us will have the ability to actually specify every day of the year what the relative humidity and what the temperature are in our storage environment. And then I would refer you to published literature to find out what's perfect for your area. But if you can keep it where a person is comfortable, take off the highs and lows of both your temperature and your relative humidity, you'll be doing the majority of what you can for your object. And then you also have to have it in the best storage materials. So if you can keep your environment stable, somewhere in the middle of everything, and use the best storage materials, and then good practices like always checking for insects and mold and making sure there's airflow, then you'll be doing 99% of what you can to improve the storage of our collection.
Right. Looks like we maybe have one question coming in. I'm not sure, but we'll see. And we'll wait a few minutes. I have carefully written all of your links that you mentioned.
Thank you.
In the during the talk, and I will include them. I'll expand the handout and include them so you can go directly to that, and they'll all be listed there. You won't have to go back through the thing. Is there an easy way to determine which quilt should be rolled and which should be boxed? And what's the best diameter for tubes?
I'd say the largest diameter you can afford, like 6 inches, is what makes me feel best. It doesn't have to be like a 10-inch or an 8-inch tube that we would put, say, a tapestry on. So the largest diameter that you can afford is best. I would say that thinner quilts are better for rolling. Quilt tops and thin quilts without a lot of batting, and quilts that are thick and plush would do better in a box. Likewise, any quilt with surface embellishment, say painted pictures on a crazy quilt or lots of French knots or anything like that, would do better folded in a box, in that case perhaps with the tissue interleaving. And just generally maybe a newer or a stronger or a healthier quilt, I feel would be a better suited to take up the rolled storage part of your storage area, and that the folded part of your storage area would be reserved for your more delicate quilts.
And we have 2 more questions. What's the best suggestion for photographing if you don't have a big frame with clips?
To get on a ladder and take it from above.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And how would you store a 9 by 12-foot carpet?
On a roll, a bigger diameter perhaps. If it's a pile carpet, you'll be able to look up the hints on what direction the pile needs to be when you roll a pile carpet. And good amount of muslin at the beginning, at the end. So before you start, you got a lot of muslin rolled on your tube, and then you lay out the carpet or the quilt, whatever, on the last couple inches of fabric, and then it sort of grabs the object when you roll it up. And then at the end, lay down a nice wide piece of muslin or fabric and roll it up so that your fabric goes around the roll of your tube at least once, maybe twice.
Okay.
If you have extra length of tube, put your ties, like your strips of fabric or your twill tape ties, outside of the width of your object on the tube itself, if possible. Sometimes that's not possible, and so then you have some ties on the object. Sometimes you have both. You've got the middle ones on the object and the outer ones are on just the tube.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions. We may have one more flying in, but we'll see. Like I said, I will make sure that all of the resources that you mentioned are in the reformatted handout, and I'll post that with the recording. And the way you can tell if the recording has been posted is the ad for it will no longer show in the slider on the home page. And then you should just go to the archive page on the website. You look in the 2017 website page, and it'll be there. And just so you know, the web addresses for all of the webinars stay the same through their whole lifetime. They don't change at all. So if you have the ad, you can look up the thing. So I think that's it. We'll see you next month. Thank you so much, Camille. This was very good. And
my pleasure.
Mike. And I think that's it. So great. We will see you all next week, and that's it. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
And don't forget the evaluation. This is the evaluation link. I am so bad about remembering it. The evaluations are really important. So the link is up here in the upper left-hand corner. Thank you, Mike, for reminding me. And we will see you next month. It's so nice to see so many people from the West, from New Mexico and North Dakota and Wyoming. I'm really pleased about that. And
yeah, quilts are such a universal language. They're wonderful.
They are. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.